study by the Centers for Disease Control found that 13.5% of girls said they had been forced to have sex, an 18% increase since 2019, and 1 in 10 said they had been raped. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children additionally reports that the ages of trafficking victims has gone down, and the children account for more than half of all trafficking victims in America. I had the great honor of hosting this panel tonight with two extraordinary leaders who I'm so excited to introduce you to. Dr. Kathleen Ethier is a social psychologist and director of the Centers for Disease Control's Division of Adolescent and School Health in the National Center for HIV, Viral Hepatitis, STD, and Tuberculosis Prevention. She has served as a leader of the Centers for Disease Control and Adolescent Health, as well as other capacities since 1999. Prior to joining the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Ethier spent 6 years on the research faculty at Yale University studying HIV, STDs, and unplanned pregnancy prevention among women and adolescents. Her research has primarily focused on psychosocial, behavioral, and environmental factors related to adolescent mental and physical health. Dr. Ethier earned her PhD in social psychology from the Graduate Center of the SUNY University of New York. It is my great honor to introduce tonight's guest of honor, I would say, and future best-selling author. Ruchira Gupta is a writer, feminist campaigner, professor at New York University, and founder of the anti-sex trafficking organization, Apne Ap Women Worldwide, and also one of my new personal heroes. She won the Clinton Global Citizen Award in 2009, the Sarah Bengali Award in 2012, and an Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Journalism in 1996. She has helped more than 20,000 girls and women in India exit prostitution systems. She has also edited As If Women Matter, an anthology of Gloria Steinem's essays, and written manuals on human trafficking for the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime. Ruchira divides her time between Delhi and New York. I Kick and I Fly is her debut novel. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much.
I gotta say, I've been excited for this panel for weeks now, and I just can't wait to dive into this conversation. It's a serious topic, but we were both just backstage, and you two are such great conversationalists, so it's gonna be a fun conversation. Ms. Gupta, this is an extraordinary novel. It's very dark, very, very dark, but it is also incredibly empowering, profoundly empowering. I found myself wondering about the young woman who inspired it all. You said this started when you read about a 14-year-old girl like Kira who won a karate competition in Forbesganj. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes, you are.
Have you connected with her about the novel? Is she aware of it?
Yes, so I still run an NGO in India and here in New York called Apne Ap Women Worldwide, which works to end sex trafficking. And the way we do it is by helping kids from red light areas and daughters of prostituted women who are trapped in something called intergenerational prostitution, which is like intergenerational poverty. So I try to get their children into school and help them stay in school and even through college and help them get their first jobs. So I began this whole journey 20 years ago. And for me, when I was doing it blind. I was a journalist, a writer, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I responded to a request from 22 women in prostitution who said that they wanted a different future for their daughters from what they had been through. And the reason I met them was because I'd made a documentary called The Selling of Innocence. And in the process of making the documentary, these women had broken their silence and spoke about what was going on in their lives, the exploitation, the poverty, the oppression, the discrimination. And I went on to win an Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Journalism for that documentary. But, when I was looking at the bright lights in front of me, all I could see were the eyes of the women. And I went back to Bombay, put a straw mat on the floor, and we sat around in a circle and they said, we want education for our children. So I hired a teacher and we began, not knowing if I would succeed. And I had no idea how vicious the traffickers could be. They would pull out a knife at my throat. They would heckle the women. They would attack our offices. And eventually, I started a hostel, just like, there's a woman in the book who starts a hostel not far from the red light area so that the women could visit their children, but enough to keep the traffickers at bay so that they would not be able to walk into the mud huts, and which had no doors and windows in the red light district in Bihar where I work, and just take the child whenever they wanted. So in this hostel, the girls could eat and get help with homework and also, just be safe. Even there, the traffickers would jump over walls to kidnap the girls, and we had to make the hostel walls go higher, put a security guard at the gate, and all of that. So when I was educating these children, I had no idea that I would at all succeed, because there were too many odds, too much poverty, too much oppression, too much danger, and I didn't have any infrastructure or experience. But I listened to the women as I went along that, let's make the wall higher, let's get a security guard. It was all practical. And also the mothers, the way they would believe in me. And because they believed in me, I sort of stood up and did whatever I could think of to do. The power of women's collective strength. And people used to say that you're never going to succeed with these girls. This community is doomed to this. This is the destiny of this nomadic tribe. And I would say, fine, even if I can keep a girl from not being raped for 2 years, it's 2 years of not being raped. So I'm going to do it for 2 years. But, I always had this dream that one girl will succeed and she will prove all these people in town wrong, that nothing can be done. And after a few years of running my NGO, when a girl who was 14 years old, and she was the daughter of a prostituted woman, and her mother had been kidnapped and sold into prostitution when she was 9 or 10. So, there was this whole thing, and they used to live in a mud hut with no doors and windows. It was a dirt street. And the trafficker would live at the end of the street just praying that I'm going to get this girl as soon as the cattle fair comes into town. And suddenly, and the town people would tell me, why are you sending her to school? And why are you mixing her up with other children from mainstream society? I would say that she's a girl like any other girl, and she's studying, and she deserves the right to education like any of your kids. So they would say, set up 2 different hostels. And I would say, no, she's going to succeed. Don't give up on her. So when this girl, and as I told you that these traffickers were jumping over walls to kidnap our kids. So I thought that, I'll start karate classes for these kids, because even if they are kidnapped, even if they are shoved into a brothel or the cattle fair comes into town, at least if they know self-defense, they can kick a few teeth of these traffickers, these pimps and sex buyers and all of that. At least they'll have something. It won't just be caving in. And so I used to see 2 people teaching karate to some kids in a rice field. And I asked them, I said, will you come to the red light area where our community center is and to our hostel and teach these kids? And he said, yes. And I saw the change in their girls, as they began to learn karate, their shoulders opened up. They began to walk straighter. The things they did not like about their body, they began to like it. They learned agility, flexibility, and all of that. And to answer your question, when did I begin to write it and what happened to that girl? So, my heart was very full when the first girl won a gold medal in karate, because I thought, I'm right and the entire town is wrong. And this girl is right and she has courage. And not only did I feel that, but her mother felt that, and the community women began to think that they were worth something. So it sort of gave a sort of boost to our effort to get the kids into school. So I was hopping onto a flight that day, I remember, after the competition. And I began writing the story on the plane, and I stopped writing it when the plane landed because some other issue came up and I began dealing with it. And then the lockdown gave me time to finish the story. The lockdown also reignited the desire to write the story, because I was reading that kids are being preyed upon by traffickers online, and there is seasoning and grooming and seduction, and it's happening all over the world. And I thought, I have a story which is based on truth and hope. A real girl stood up to these predators and won. And she came from nothing, dirt poor. So anybody can. So that's why this girl meant a lot to me. And of course, now there are many girls who have won gold medals in karate, many girls who've been through the Apne Aap program and finished school and college. So the girl that I write about in I Kick and I Fly is not one girl. She's a composite of many girls. And they all are doing well. And I took the book back to them when I had a not for sale advance copy in winter. And we all sat together in a circle and we shared the story. And that girl, because now she's a graduate and has a job, one of those girls, she comes to volunteer in Apne Aap to teach the next generation of kids, right? So she actually was teaching the children about this book and reading to them and telling them the story and the journey and all of that. And that was such an amazing moment for me. I just stood quietly in the corner and she kept saying, Didi, come stand next to me. I said, no, I want to watch you teach. And it was beautiful.
What was your experience with martial arts before this?
I did try to learn Kung Fu. I was inspired by Bruce Lee. I had watched Enter the Dragon. And I used to sing that song, those kids are as fast as lightning. And I wanted to be that person, and I had a black t-shirt with Bruce Lee's kicking. So I
Be like water, be like water.
Be like water,
Yes.
be like water. So yeah, and I like his philosophy. He says there can be no bright stars without dim stars. And in all our lives, we have seen that. So, we shine sometimes we don't. And sometimes we shine because our friends are around us, dim or bright. So Bruce Lee has been a big inspiration, as has been Kung Fu.
My goodness. Dr. Ethier, when you read this and you're just walking through this story with Hira, what was your thoughts as an expert on adolescent psychiatry? And
I think the thing that struck me was, your work has been on the extreme of sexual exploitation of girls. And I think you could read it as this doesn't happen here, but we know that it does. But also, we put this report out in February, and since then, there have been a number of both news articles and TV, TV interviews of teenage girls in this country, talking about the ways in which they have to protect their bodies so that they don't experience some kind of sexual assault. And so they're talking, we heard girls talk about wearing wedding rings on the bus so that they didn't get approached, wearing baggy clothing. And so I was just struck. There was a couple of places where you talked about this in the book of this sense of ownership of one's body and the ways in which girls have to protect their bodies. And so it is, there's this whole range. So I was struck by that I could see so much of what we have heard about sexual victimization of girls in our data shows up in the story of the book. But also I was so struck by the things in the story that held the characters up are the same things that we know hold up young people around the world and in this country. So those are things like connectedness, whether that's connectedness in school or connectedness in community or connectedness in family. Having at least one adult who sees you and supports you and is there for you and protects you. We know from years of research how important that is. And so you did just this beautiful job of putting those things in the book, but I think it's because in your experience of both being that person and also seeing how that sense of connection holds people up, it just rang so true to me that this is what we try to do to support young people, is to provide that sense of connection. When there are all of these forces kind of in society trying to drag that down and isolate them and victimize. And so it was just so valuable to see all of those different pieces that we've been thinking about and working about so much in the story about something that's probably very different than most young people in this country's lives.
Oh, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, of course. Which author won't respond to someone talking about the
I
book?
love it.
But that's exactly what I wanted to do, because I had a story which was based on truth and hope.
Mhm.
And I thought, this is what I want to share with kids. I live in New York now, and I was seeing what kids are going through, because I sometimes teach once a year at NYU. And so many young people have told me about the horrors they've been through, including when they were in the army in Iraq and places like that. So I know that there is this culture of sexual violence, but nobody is talking about it. And because of that, young people don't have the tools to either spot the signs of sexual predatory or how to equip themselves to navigate it. And which is why, they think they are at fault for body shaming, for bullying, and that then can lead to sexual abuse because there's a trajectory from that. And we can totally change the trajectory by breaking the silence. Because we can tell the children that it's not about you. You are not at fault. It's the system which is allowing these people, these sex predators, these traffickers. In my case, it's traffickers here. I don't know who it is out there online who are creating these fake IDs or real IDs through chatbots, seducing kids and then meeting them in hotel rooms as real people. And then, of course, it's a short step to even pimping and trafficking them because they'll make sex videos. So that's in the world of human trafficking that I deal with. But even in the daily life of a young adult in school, the kind of person who'll end up studying in my university or something, right? Is that there is body shaming, there is bullying, and there is, sexual abuse. The very things that you talk about in the CDC report of youth, which you just brought out. And I was taken aback when your report came out because it was just months before my book came. And I thought you're talking about exactly the subjects I touch upon. And I have done this because I had to do it in real life for 20 years, right? Figuring out how can we help this kid not be trafficked? How can help this kid not be sexually exploited? And so the answers that you talk about come from real life. And, that how can you stop someone from being body shamed? How can you stop someone from being bullied? How can you stop someone from being sexually abused, or even being able to spot the signs of somebody who's going to come after them, right? And feel good about it. And exactly, so, the women's collective action, how did it work? I experienced it, that there's nothing as powerful as a community coming together around something it cares about. There is nothing as important as someone's courage in triggering change. And even if it's a 14-year-old girl. And also what I found, karate really was important, as I write about Kung Fu in my book, because you have to love your body to
Body autonomy.
It's bodily autonomy, absolutely. And I'm just hoping my book is like a message in a bottle, really. I kick and I fly, I've called it, but I really want kids to kick and fly. Reject the things you hate and take on the things you love, and find the courage inside you to do that. And how do you find the courage? Exactly as you said, that there's some adult who will stand by you.
I mean, I think the thing, it is one thing to, it's one thing to speak to young people and to give them messages of both information. This is what this is. This is how we talk about it. This is how you can try to protect yourself. And to have that conversation and to have that conversation openly. I think as much as you wrote the book for young people, I think it's also for adults to learn how to be those people. Because I think to expect young people to be the drivers in protecting themselves is a lot to ask. And so what I think is also so important is, how do we have the conversation? Like, how do we provide that scaffolding, right? That supports them, that protects them, that holds them up and gives them the opportunity to learn karate or kung fu, or to learn the thing that is going to take them out of where they are, and take them to that next place, while teaching them their value, but while also being the adults in the room. And I think once, you know, for the characters in your book, once the adults started being the adults in the room, everything got better.
Exactly.
And so I think that is part of the challenge, and part of why we're seeing such a mental health crisis for young people, is that, you know, in many ways, the adults are so busy arguing with each other about what is the right scaffolding, that we're not scaffolding. And so I think this is a beautiful example of a way in which a community can come together, sparked by at least one adult who's saying, this is what's good for kids.
You know, yesterday I had a book event, and an actor from India, a direct actor, she was telling me that before she could even read the book, her 14-year-old son read the book. And he began to ask her all kinds of questions that, you know, why did she have to take her clothes off? Or why did, you know, the man want to take her into the cattle fair? Or, you know, what happened to the brother who wanted to be a scientist, but his school did not have a science lab? So this, my friend said that, you know, for the first time, she could talk to her son about homelessness, about poverty, about sexual predatory behavior by men, and also the vulnerability of girls. Because there was a book, it was in a story form, written like a social justice adventure, and so kids could relate to it. It's fast paced, as you know, you've read it, but also, you know, it was all new for them, so they found it interesting, and he could ask questions. And she said, I had finally a way to talk to my son about these things, which I've always wanted to, but I didn't know. And these were all third person people, right? The characters. You can say Hira said this, or Salman said this, or Baba or Ammi said this, you
It was a
know.
little safer to talk about.
Yes.
Well, I think that the you know, one of the things that is challenging is that we are focused on what happens to girls, but where boys and men are use the word predator, or the perpetrator, that's a better word. And so we have to both change the environment for girls. That also means changing the environment for boys. And I thought that, you know, there were that you touched on that really nicely in the book, while making the story be about the girls. That the boys were kind of caught up in an environment with expectations of who they were going to be and how they were going to act and what their jobs were going to be in this whole exploitation structure. And so I do think we have to both break the cycle for girls, but we also have to break the cycle for boys.
Exactly.
And, you know, after our report came out, I, you know, heard from a lot of, you know, reporters and podcasters who are also parents. So we had lots of conversations about, you know, real fear if you are the parent of a teenage girl, but also real fear if you're the parent of a teenage boy, and not wanting your son to be a perpetrator. And how do you prevent that from happening? And so, you know, I know that when we have done work in schools where we have focused on creating connection, regardless of, you know, the gender of anybody in the room, we see decreases in the percent of young people who say they've been forced to have sex. And what that means is we're changing the environment for everyone, because we can't see the decrease in experience of forced sex if we're not also decreasing perpetration. And so that sense of having a community and having connection and having people, having adults in schools who care about you and care about your success and your well-being changes the whole environment for everyone. And I think you see that in your book as well, is that things not only change for the girls, but things also change for the boys.
And that's why when I read the CDC report, I thought, here is this report done with thousands of kids across America. And the recommendations are exactly what I've arrived at through trial and error. And the CDC analyst has arrived at it. Yeah. Or, I thought here are two women working in two different parts of the world with two different methodologies, right? I'm working grassroots and finding this works, this doesn't work. And you're finding it through talking to young people across America.
Yeah, I mean, I think the roots are so much so much of what we see in terms of poor mental health and sexual violence and other kinds of violence. Everything that we're seeing right now. I mean, everything on the news, there is a root of social isolation in almost all of it. When we become isolated from each other, we don't have that sense of connection, all kinds of bad stuff happens. And so the more we can repair that, and find whatever ways we can to repair that and kind of cross those boundaries and increase that sense of connection, things will get better. And I love that sense. When we released this report, it is very, in the same way that your book is heavy, it is a very heavy report. And being able to try to find hope on the other side of it, which is the impact of social connection. For us, it's school connectedness, but any kind of social connection, whether that's family connectedness, the way that repairs is really profound. And so and I think that's humanness. As humans, we need to be connected to each other. And when we lose that is when there's exploitation and depression and all of the things.
And this idea that, men will be men, and so men have to perform a certain kind of masculinity and girls have to be girls in a certain way is so difficult for both girls and boys.
Absolutely.
Because, these are all, you're called a sissy if you're not masculine enough, you're called not pretty, and then you feel. And so the body shaming is both ways and leading to bullying also. And, the sense of, and then also, I've noticed this fear, shame, and guilt, which all kids are living with these days. And that's because of isolation, because they don't realize that it's happening to all of us. They begin to think that I'm at fault for though I'm being body shamed. I'm at fault for wanting sex, but nobody's talking to me about it. And if I end up in an exploitative situation. So, we have to break this culture of silence. And, we don't talk to kids about what's happening to kids their age. We don't talk to kids about things which are relevant in their lives. And therefore, we fail them because we don't teach them how to navigate the challenges which are very much a part of their lives. And, we can do it in an interesting way. We can do it in an age-appropriate way. We can do it in a fun way, like an adventure, like I Kick and I Fly. And we can create, parallel and tools with it so that people know that, if parents want to discuss. So what we did with I Kick and I Fly was that the book is for young adults. I chose Scholastic as my publisher because, I want to reach every kid in every schoolroom of America. But also, we made a reader's guide, and that is for adults, because I think that adults are more scared to talk to kids about what's happening. And they need tools. So I just want everyone to be able to get over the fear, shame, and guilt. Parents and teachers have one kind of fear, shame, and guilt, and then that passes on to the kids. So if we can break this culture of silence, I think we can break the isolation there.
Yeah, I think the fact that so many people were surprised, shocked by the sexual violence data when we released it in February, but it wasn't shocking to the young people that they're in the various different articles and broadcastings that people did. And most of the young people that I talked to said it's probably an underestimate.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your report, because I read your report like 20 times, I think. And every time I find something new in it, which is absolutely true. So, that, and even about boys, like what you wrote about, that the boys are also victimized, LGBTQ are victimized just because they will not follow the normative path to sex and sexuality, and how that leads to them becoming either violated or violators. And these are issues we have to discuss. We don't want so much violence.
Absolutely. Can we take you back to a documentary that you produced in the 90s, the Selling of Innocence, and that moment when you're touring villages in Nepal, and you're realizing all these young girls, some as young as 12, are being kidnapped from villages and sold into sexual slavery. Well, I mean, what was that process like in getting together the documentary? And I mean, because that's an extraordinary undertaking, and it won an Emmy. My goodness.
I won an Emmy, and now this year I'll probably again. I was a judge for the Emmys, so it's good. It's full circle.
Full circle.
I used to be a young journalist, and I was hiking through the hills of Nepal when I came across rows of villages with missing girls, and there were men drinking tea and playing cards. And I asked them, "Where are the girls?" And some didn't answer, but the few who did, they said, "Don't you know they're in Bombay?" And Bombay was 1,400 kilometers away, and these villages were like 2 hours off the highway. So, of course, I dropped the story I was doing and started following this story instead. And I ended up in the brothels of Bombay, where little girls were locked up in tiny rooms with iron bars on the window and being exploited for years. And as a journalist, as a woman, as a citizen, I couldn't believe this existed. I was angry, I was shocked, and of course I was determined to do something about it. So I decided to make the documentary. Making the documentary was really hard because we had to take on the traffickers who did not want us to make a documentary. So they would throw stones at our cars. They would try to stop us from going into the villages in Nepal. Some of the cops were corrupt, so they would try to stop us. But we would somehow manage and do some things. In Bombay, it was even more dangerous. It's the crime capital of India also. So I remember I was filming and I was in this tiny room inside the brothel, and I was in there because the women had pulled me in and said, "We will tell you our stories." And a man pulled out his knife at my throat and he said, "You can't tell the story." And I thought, the door, he's blocking the door.
How pimps, right?
The pimp,
yeah.
a trafficker, a pimp, a customer, I don't know who he was. And I thought I'm dead, but the women surrounded me. And they said that if you want to kill her, you've got to kill us. We've decided to tell our story. And so that's how I completed the documentary. And that's how the women stayed in my heart and my mind, because they had saved my life. And they had rescued me before I did any rescuing of anyone. So I understood the power of women's collective action in that moment. And that became the organizing principle of my NGO, Apne Aap. It means self-action in Hindi. And the full name is Apne Aap Women Worldwide. So half of it is Hindi, half of it is English, but it's about collective action.
Goodness. I'm trying not to cry, but it's hard. So, my goodness. Dr. Ethier, there's a terrible perception that human trafficking is limited to underdeveloped countries. I think the average American would probably perceive human trafficking that way, and yet it's an enormous problem here in the United States. Can you expand on that, kind of contextualize it for us?
Yeah. I mean, we don't. I don't think we, at least from our data collection standpoint, we don't have any idea of the range of human trafficking in this country. I think in the same way that when you do a documentary and you can call attention to it. And so, when we do these large surveys, we don't know when someone says they've been forced to have sex, whether they've been trafficked, whether they've been abused, because it's lifetime, whether they've been abused as a child, whether it's their next door neighbor. Like we have no idea.
But our best guess, a few 100,000, though, is our best guess.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. But I do think, as I was reading the book, I think exactly that. Like the perception is that this is across the world. This is not happening in our own country. And I think you go through the airport, and I know in the Atlanta airport there are announcements that say, you know, human trafficking, and if you see something, say something. But I don't think that most people in the US are walking through an airport or walking through a city or walking through a community and are thinking, this is what this is. And so I do think it would be a real service to help readers translate what they're seeing in your book, especially for the adults, into what they should be looking for in their communities for some of the same things. I think it's perceived as a law enforcement issue, as opposed to this is something that young girls in our community are at risk for. So I think having that conversation about, you know, it's that whole range. It is everything from understanding that sexual violence is pervasive, and it ranges from young women in high schools, you know, not being able to walk through the halls of their school or the streets of their community or the mall without in some way being targeted. Almost 20% of teenage girls in our survey said that they had experienced some type of sexual violence, all the way from inappropriate touching to rape in the last year. So that's 1 in 5 in the last year. And then that goes all the way to, you know, kind of this lifetime experience of being forced to have sex. And from our data, we don't know what the context is, but assuming that some of it is.
And, you know, that's why Center for Disease Control is really important, that they have done the report, because the physical and mental health consequences of sex trafficking and sexual abuse are so devastating that now data shows that there is more mortality, deaths of people who have been trafficked among women in prostitution than even among returning war veterans. They die by the time they're 30 or 35. So we don't even understand the full consequences of this. Why do they die? Okay, some may commit suicide, but there are many who do not commit suicide. There's murder, yes, but there's also so many other diseases, from PTSD. And that also research shows that, again, women in prostitution suffer from higher rates of PTSD than ex-vets. So, you know, nobody understands what this means. Like, this is body invasion. And if there is body invasion, then what are the physical and mental health consequences? So if we can prevent it by having a conversation around it, if we can watch out for the signs of it, you know, what is trauma? And, you know, now I was just talking to a pediatrician before coming here to our meeting today. And she was saying that she deals with some inner city kids in Kansas City because she works in Mercy Hospital. And she was telling me that there's this kid, you know, who's always angry and has started using funny words like 6ix9ine and, you know, things like that, and other language. And she says, what do you think that is? I said, definitely there's sexual abuse there. Now, we can make lists. You know, there are enough doctors out there who can help us. And if we work with pediatricians, if we work with public health officials, you know, it's not just a law enforcement issue. It's like a public health issue right now. And that's why the CDC report is so timely.
Let's be honest, this is not a system that is designed for survivors to seek out justice or to seek relief from sexual abuse. It's not.
No.
So many young people, for various reasons, are afraid to go to police because they feel they won't be believed, which in many cases they're right, they're not believed, or the rape kits get lost or intentionally destroyed. I think, what is it, less than 1% of overall reported rapes actually result in a conviction. The statute of limitations alone, you know, kids who are sexually assaulted or raped must live in a state in which the statute of limitations is not passed. And in many states, it has passed by the time they go to make a claim.
Except in New York.
Yeah, except in New York, thank goodness. Yes, elections matter, let me tell you. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and when I reached out to a lawyer about 10 years ago to get, because I knew who it was and I wanted to seek out some kind of justice, or said, I'm really sorry, but the window's closed for that. There's nothing that can be done. So I called another lawyer, and they all said the same thing. And what really got to me, though, was that when I asked, okay, are there any options at all? And two of them, the second and the third lawyer, they said something to the effect of, well, do they have any assets? Do they have any money? Like, I don't want money. I want justice. I'm like, well, if you don't want money, we can't help you. So that was it. It's not a system that is built for survivors.
And that's why, this conversation is so important, because the CDC report can become the bedrock around which we can think about how do we deal with trauma, how can we equip kids, and, we can do it in so many different ways. We can even equip schools with tools, books, and training manuals, and, teach teachers how to have these conversations. There's so many things which can be done.
So first, I'm so sorry.
No.
And I think your experience is the experience of so many people where the trying to get justice in some way is re-traumatizing. And I think the most important thing that we can do is to provide trauma-informed support for young people and adults who have experienced sexual violence, and also to create environments that prevent sexual violence in the first place. And that ranges from everything from education around consent, around, what is sexual violence, being able to name those things, and toward the kinds of school environments and community environments that support that sense of connection. And what we know is that when you do those things, you both heal. So we've seen that connectedness. There has been studies that have looked at, young people in the juvenile justice system who are very traumatized, young people who have experienced adverse childhood events across a whole range, that when you improve that sense of connection, when you give them that, when you provide that kind of trauma support, there is hope there. They can get to the other side of that. And so it both prevents kind of new trauma and heals old trauma. And so I think until we fully incorporate that, and so use the justice system where we can to bring, perpetrators to justice where that's possible, but realizing that that's not going to be the primary venue for most people because of the way that things are set up, to make sure that we are creating environments that really do deal with trauma effectively and prevent traumatizing events from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. And, I saw this in my NGO also, that, initially the women did not want to come forward to talk about anything because there was nothing in it for them. So if they would go, the courts would not believe them, the judges wouldn't believe them, the cops wouldn't believe them. It was just like going on and on. But as we began to create more and more services, even through our small NGO in a small area, those were the women who came forward because suddenly there were systems in place for them and a cushion of stability, cushion, support, connections for them to be able to speak up and force the justice, because initially even the justice system was not responding. And so, each thing is interconnected also when you deal with a victim or even for prevention. And we have to begin very early on, but it's doable. And that's the story I want to explain to people, because they think, oh, human trafficking is such a big issue, or sexual exploitation of girls is normal, it's part of your teenage experience, or boys will be boys. Not at all. All of it can change. And I have seen it in my own lifetime. And that's why I wrote it in I Kick and I Fly, because it's based on truth. And, kids can learn that and they can create a different world. Whatever we have inherited is what we've inherited. But we can, the kids can create a different world.
Oh, wait, that does strike me about this novel is, I think most novelists will have, they have this story of how they write, and it does a lot of research, and there are all these stories of these great novelists who go out of their way for years to study this art form, or, to learn the violin or whatever, just so they can get inside the minds of their characters. You did it completely the opposite way. You've written an extraordinary novel based on your life, saving 20,000 girls and women in India from sex trafficking. I mean, that's extraordinary. It really is. Do you ever take a step back and just reflect on that?
I like hearing what you say. So that's the only moments I get when I can step back and think, oh, I'm a writer. Because I just wrote it because just felt I needed to get it out there. It was like urgent in that moment. And now, when you say that it's an extraordinary novel, or you talk about the characters in I Kick and I Fly, it feels so good. It's like one of those pinch me moments, and then, yeah, I wrote it, and
But it's so good. I mean, it is a really, really good novel.
Initially I wrote it because I wanted it to be fun for kids, though I was dealing with a hard subject like human trafficking. So I said, I'm going to make the character be the forefront of the story. How she's becoming a kung fu champion, how she's fighting for her body and to get back to school, and then for her family and her community. And how does she do it if she's dirt poor and only like 14?
Has it been optioned yet? I mean, I know it's not officially out yet, but has it been optioned yet?
It is officially out now, 5 days.
I'm so sorry.
5 days.
For some reason, I thought it was next week.
Us in Washington at NYU today, it's the first day.
It's been a long week here in DC.
I know, but at least you've read it, and that's great, So because
yeah, I got
just so
mine
enjoy.
3 weeks ago, and I've flown through it. So.
Oh, you got the advanced copy. That's right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But has it been optioned for a film yet? Has anyone bought the rights?
No, not yet.
This is going to be a movie, right?
I hope so, because I've always looked at the Queen's Gambit and enjoyed it so much. Then I like Rocky. I like Holes. And I think, it's Queen's Gambit and Rocky and Holes.
It is. It really is. And by the way, if there are any producers, listening right now, you need to buy this book. It's going to be a great movie someday. I just have a gut feeling about it. So.
I hope so, from your mouth to God's ears, because if it becomes a movie, more kids will watch it and they'll get more answers and inspiration. And it ends with so much hope.
It does.
It ends with so much fun and hope.
Gloria Steinem has played an enormous role in your life. And she told one of the young women that you saved something very profound. And it kind of made me think of something an experience I had with Gloria Steinem years ago, a very small, minor, brief one. What did she tell the young woman under your care?
So Gloria has visited with my NGO Apne Aap in Forbesganj, the very town that I write about in I Kick and I Fly, 5 times. And, my mother said that most people come to this town once and you've come 5 times. One of those times was, there was the birthday of Jane Fonda. I don't remember which birthday, 70th or something. And Gloria said, no, it's more important to be in this place, in the community center, and sit and talk to the girls. And I remember that was the time when one girl who was 12 and she knew the cattle fair was going to come and her father wanted to sell her. She had 5 younger siblings. Everyone was starving. Her mother was dead. And she had no roof. Like the roof was always leaking, no doors, no windows, mud hut. And so she felt it was a duty to allow her dad to sell her into the cattle fair. And so I said, we used to run these little community newspapers for the girls and they would write their stories in it. So I said, you interview Gloria Steinem for your community newspaper. So she very sweetly asked Gloria, she said, but if I don't let my father sell me, then how will the family and he eat? And Gloria turned around and told her that, remember, your body belongs only to you and to nobody else. Nobody can buy you or sell you. And somehow that girl understood and she resisted and she said, no, I'll stay on in school, because I wasn't able to convince her.
What is it about that woman? She just knows exactly what to say.
She really does. You know, the word body invasion, I would have never thought of it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thomas, how much time do we have? Are we 5 minutes? Okay.
Do you have any last questions?
Best advice.
Best advice. You keep writing wonderful novels like this. You know, the connection, I know I've said that word a lot, the connection between these global issues and what is happening in our own towns and cities and, you know, and communities around the country, it is so important for us to make that connection, to not just think that this is something that's happening somewhere far away. And so I think your next book should be set here. Okay. With I think similar issues, because I do worry that it is so easy for us to think that this is not happening here.
I agree.
And I think, you know, one of the reasons why our report in February and, you know, kind of the reaction that so many people have had to it is because it shakes you, right? It shakes your view of what's happening to your kids, other people's kids in this country. And so I just think it's so important. I just saw so many pieces of the story that rang true for me of what I know is happening with young people here. And so being able to make that connection, I think, is incredibly important and will be really eye-opening and allow us to have important conversations like this one. Yeah, it's a good conversation.
And across class lines, by the way. And that is something that is so irritating to me. You know, there are children in the middle class and you know, maybe wealthy families who fall into these same traps because they don't have nurturing parents around them who teach them empowerment, make sure they have the resources they need. We have to stop thinking about human trafficking as this thing that's, you know, something that happens in other parts of the world to impoverish people without systems. It happens across the board. It is an endemic.
That and we need to do some analyses of our data that gets at that. We have the ability to do that. Great idea. I'm taking that.
Thank you. We would love it in our anti-trafficking movement. And you know what, I've also tried to, that's why I begin the book. I don't want to give away spoilers because the book is just out this week and I want everyone to read it. But, you know, the book begins in India and ends in Queens. And somewhere there is a moment in America where different survivors get together and talk to each other about what's happening. So you will understand the universal nature of these issues through their conversations among young people. But also what I've tried to do is I've created end resources, and you can go into the website. It's called ikicandifly.com or my website, ruchiragupta.com, where I have created data. Of course, I put your report there. But I've also put, you know, UN data that it's the second largest crime in the world. I put data from the National Center for Sexual and Exploited Children.
The appendix is so good.
Yes. And that says like 100,000 to 300,000 people are victims of human trafficking in the United States alone. The average age of a girl trafficked in the US is between 13 and 15. So, of course, it's happening right here. And we have to deal with it. And there is a trajectory from sexual abuse to sex trafficking because girls begin to devalue themselves and then, you know, the traffickers can prey on them. So I think that we have to really go forward with the tools, with the data, with the research, because nobody will believe us if we say this.
And the will.
And the will.
Ms. Gupta, congratulations. This is a great book, and I can say that I knew you before you were a best-selling author.
I'm going to make a movie.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Ethier, thank you so much for all you do. Congratulations on the recent report.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to get into every school.
Go buy it. I Kick and I Fly.